The silence before the storm. The day began like any other for Keanu Reeves. The sky over Los Angeles was draped in pale gray clouds. Not stormy, but not sunny either, like the world itself couldn't make up its mind. He walked quietly down a familiar street, his coat tucked against the light breeze, his face half hidden beneath a cap and sunglasses. Fame had taught him to hide in plain sight. He wasn't there to be noticed. He was there to think. For months, he had been drifting. Not lost exactly, but not anchored either. He had just wrapped a film, something dramatic and dark, the kind of role that stays with you long after the cameras stop. He had poured his soul into it, and now that it was done, he felt hollow. He needed something to refill the quiet inside him, something real. Not a script, not a spotlight, not applause. He needed connection. He found himself standing in front of a quiet old library on a forgotten corner of the city. It was the kind of place most people ignored, too small to be famous, too worn to be modern. The windows were streaked with dust, and the brass handle on the door had been polished smooth by decades of hands. Something about it called to him. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was the memory of who he had been before all this. He stepped inside. The air smelled of aged paper and wood polish. Time itself seemed to move slower there. A single librarian sat behind a heavy oak desk, her glasses perched low, her eyes scanning pages with a kind of reverence. She looked up and offered a quiet smile. Keanu nodded, grateful for the silence, and wandered into the aisles. The library was mostly empty. Shelves stretched high, filled with books that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. As he walked, his fingers brushed spines covered in faded gold lettering. It was peaceful, grounding. He moved without a destination, letting instinct guide him. Then he heard it. A whisper. Soft. Barely there. Like the brush of wind through leaves. He stopped. Tilted his head. Nothing. He took another step. And again, the whisper returned. This time, clearer. Not words exactly. More like the sound of breath being shaped into meaning. He turned the corner. There, seated on a worn carpet in the children's section, were two girls. They looked to be around 7, maybe 8. Identical twins. They had long dark hair, tied with simple blue ribbons, and wide eyes that shimmered with something ancient. They were dressed neatly, their shoes slightly scuffed as if they had walked a long way. They were staring at him, not with fear, not even with curiosity, with purpose. "You came," one of them said. Keanu blinked. "What?" "We knew you would," the other said. He looked around. The library was still quiet. The librarian at the front desk hadn't moved. It was as if no one else noticed them. "Who are you?" he asked. The first girl stood. "You have something to do. Something important. Something that can't wait," the other added. Keanu felt a strange tightness in his chest. Not fear. Something deeper. Recognition, maybe. Or destiny. "Are you alone?" he asked. They shook their heads slowly. "No," they said together. "We're never alone." He took a slow step forward. "What do you mean?" The girls reached out and each took one of his hands. Their skin was ice cold. And in that moment he wasn't in the library anymore. His eyes remained open, but the shelves vanished. The walls disappeared. Instead, he stood in a vast field beneath a dark, swirling sky. Wind howled across the grass, bending it like waves. In the distance, shadows moved. Figures without faces, their forms flickering like smoke. The twins stood in front of him, their faces serious. "This is what's coming," one of them said. "Unless you remember," said the other. "Remember what?" Keanu asked, heart pounding. But they didn't answer. Instead, the vision dissolved. He was back in the library. The girls were gone. He stood there, breathing hard, hands still cold. He rushed to the front desk. "Excuse me," he said to the librarian. "Did you see 2 girls, twins?" The librarian looked up slowly, her brow furrowed. "No," she said. "You're the only one here." Keanu looked around again. The space was empty. The only sound was the ticking of an old clock on the wall. "They were right there," he said. "In the children's section." She rose and walked over with him. Together they searched. There was no sign of them, no bags, no coats, no disturbed books. The rug where they had sat was perfectly smooth. He turned back to the librarian. "Are there security cameras?" She shook her head. "This place is too old for that." Keanu left the library confused, shaken, and yet intrigued. He had never seen those girls before, but something about them had felt familiar, like a memory just out of reach. They had known him. They had been waiting. And the vision they had shown him, that field, those shadow figures, it had felt too real to dismiss. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't imagination. He needed answers. That night, sleep didn't come easily. He sat in his home staring at the fire, the twins' voices echoing in his mind. "You have something to do. Unless you remember." "Remember what?" He pulled out an old notebook. He hadn't written in it for years. He flipped through pages filled with past thoughts, ideas, dreams he never pursued. Near the back was a name. Elias. His breath caught. He hadn't thought about Elias in more than 20 years. A name from another life. A boy he had once promised to protect. A boy he had failed. Keanu closed the notebook slowly. The next morning, he returned to the library. It was closed. A sign hung on the door. Temporarily shut due to maintenance. But he had just been there yesterday. He tried to peek through the dusty glass, but the lights were off. The shelves were empty. Impossible. He checked his phone for the address. Nothing. No listing. No website. He drove around the block, searching for landmarks. Maybe he had the wrong street. But it was gone. Not just the library. The building itself. In its place stood a small lot filled with gravel and weeds surrounded by a chain-link fence. A faded sign said, "Future site of luxury apartments." Keanu stared, his hands trembling. This couldn't be real. He stepped out of the car and walked toward the fence. A man in a construction vest passed by. "Excuse me," Keanu said. "What happened to the library that was here?" The man looked confused. "Library? There's never been a library here, sir. Not in the last 20 years. Keanu felt like the ground beneath him was shifting. "Are you sure?" The man nodded. "Pretty sure. This lot's been empty since the early 90s. He got back. In his car, heart racing. Twins. A vision. A library that no longer existed. And now, a name from his past had surfaced. A name he had buried long ago. Elias. That night, he searched his old boxes, looking for anything. He found a single photo. Himself, age 17, standing next to a boy with bright eyes and a gentle smile. Elias. They had been inseparable once. Then one night, Elias had vanished. No note. No clues. Just gone. The police had searched. Rumors had swirled. Nothing was ever found. Keanu had blamed himself. He had made a promise to protect him, and he had failed. But now, somehow the twins knew. And they had brought Elias back into his mind for a reason. At midnight, a knock came at his door. Slow. Steady. He stood frozen. Another knock. He opened the door. No one was there. But on the mat lay a small object. An old library. Card dot faded. Frayed. Stamped with the name, Elias R., and on the back, written in childish handwriting, "Meet us where the silence began." Keanu closed the door slowly. He didn't understand everything yet, but he knew one thing for sure. He was going to find those twins. He was going to uncover the truth. And this time, he wouldn't fail. Not again. Not ever. Where the silence began, sun hadn't yet risen when Keanu Reeves stood alone on the balcony of his home, the cold air brushing against his face, the thin light of dawn beginning to stretch across the city like cautious fingers testing the edge of a dream. He hadn't slept. Not even for a minute. The library card sat on the table behind him, untouched, since he picked it up off his doorstep. It didn't make sense. Not in the world of logic, not in the world of timelines. It had Elias's name on it, and he remembered the handwriting like it was carved into the very fabric of his memory. It had been over 30 years, but the loops of the letters, the small heart scratched into the dot of the I, they belonged to the boy who once made Keanu feel like the world wasn't so heavy. But Elias had disappeared. They all said he was dead. The detectives, the papers, even Elias's own mother, who had looked at Keanu with hollow eyes and whispered, "He's not coming back, is he?" He hadn't known how to answer. Guilt had eaten at him for decades, especially because the night Elias vanished, they had been planning something. They had made a promise to each other. They were supposed to run away together. Not to escape life, but to find something more meaningful than what they were handed. They were just kids, but they believed in dreams like they were real. And now, standing on that balcony as a grown man, Keanu realized he had never fully let go of those dreams. Maybe that's why the girls found him. He got dressed in silence, the morning light still pale and uncertain. He didn't know where he was going exactly, but the message on the back of the library card echoed louder than any voice in his head. "Meet us where the silence began." Those words pulled at something deeper than memory. They reached into instinct. He didn't need directions because somehow his body already knew where to go. The silence had begun long before the library. It had begun on the night Elias disappeared. And the last place they were together was a house. Not just any house, but one abandoned on the edge of Silver Lake. A place locals whispered about. A place where people swore they heard music playing when no one lived inside. It had once been their sanctuary. An old, crumbling mansion with vines crawling up its sides and broken windows that caught the moonlight like ghosts watching from within. It was the place where they had spent entire nights dreaming about the future, reading poetry by flashlight, stealing snacks from Keanu's apartment and pretending they were on the run from something bigger than themselves. It was where Elias had told him that he felt like the world never saw him, that sometimes he felt like a shadow in his own home. Keanu had promised to be his anchor, but the next time he went back, Elias was gone, and the house was darker than it had ever been. He drove there now, heart thudding louder with every mile. The streets narrowed, traffic faded, and by the time he pulled up to the dirt-covered gate of the old mansion, the city felt like a memory. He stepped out, gravel crunching beneath his boots, and stared at the place that had once held the last light of their youth. The building looked older now, more fragile, like it could collapse under the weight of history. Yet, it stood, defiant, and as he stepped closer, something stirred in the wind. It wasn't sound, it was presence. He pushed the rusted gate open, the hinges groaning like a warning. Vines had grown thicker, curling over the stone path like veins on old hands. He moved slowly, each footstep heavy with memories. The door was still broken from the last time they'd entered, the frame cracked, the handle dangling. He pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence. Cobwebs hung from the corners like time had been weaving its own story while no one watched. Light leaked through broken slats in the ceiling, casting narrow beams that danced with dust motes. The floor creaked beneath him, groaning with every step, as if remembering the boy who had once run barefoot across its surface, laughing. He moved deeper, past the living room where their sleeping bags had once laid, past the fireplace where they had lit tiny flames and shared their secrets. Everything looked the same and completely different. Then he heard it. A whisper. No. 2 whispers. They were calling his name. He followed the sound up the staircase, careful not to trust the decaying wood. The whispers grew clearer. Not frantic, not haunting. Calm, deliberate, familiar. He reached the second floor, turned left, and stopped at the doorway to the attic, a space they had only entered once, because it had always felt too sacred, too full of something they couldn't name. The door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, the light was strange, soft, silver, almost otherworldly. Dust floated like snow, and the room smelled faintly of old perfume and lavender. And there, standing by the window, were the twins. They turned in perfect unison. "You found us," one of them said. "You remembered?" said the other. Keanu stepped forward, his voice catching in his throat. Who are you? The first girl tilted her head. You already know. You just don't remember, said the second. He looked around. The room was filled with objects from the past. His old flashlight, a worn-out backpack, a stack of notebooks that belonged to Elias. And in the corner, a mirror. It wasn't just any mirror. He walked toward it slowly. The frame was carved with strange symbols, stars, waves, an eye in the center, and in the glass, he didn't see his own reflection. He saw the night Elias disappeared. In the mirror, Elias stood on the roof of the mansion, his arms outstretched, the wind tearing through his shirt, his face illuminated by moonlight. He looked peaceful, and then he turned, not toward the camera but toward Keanu himself, like he could see him, like he knew he was watching, and he smiled. He didn't fall, one of the twins whispered. He was taken, said the other. Keanu turned to them. Taken by who? They looked at each other. Then in unison, by the silence. He stepped back. What is the silence? They walked toward him now, each taking one of his hands again, just like they had in the library. The room darkened around them. Wind howled through the broken attic window. The mirror glowed. You forgot what you promised, one of them said. But the silence didn't, said the other. Suddenly, the mirror shattered, not with sound, but with a force that felt like a heartbeat stopping. Shards floated in the air, spinning slowly, each one holding a different image. A memory, a truth, a lie, a secret. One shard hovered before Keanu's face. It showed a room he didn't recognize, a circular chamber with high ceilings and walls covered in carvings. In the center stood Elias, older now, eyes filled with pain and wisdom, surrounded by shadows with human shapes but no faces. He wasn't a prisoner. He was leading them. Keanu staggered backward. What is this? He gasped. This is what he became, said one twin. Because of what you left behind, said the other. The images faded. The shards dropped gently to the floor without a sound, and in the silence that followed, Keanu felt something unlock deep inside him. A memory he had buried too deep. The last conversation with Elias. If anything ever happens to me, Elias had whispered that night, don't believe the world. Don't trust the story. Follow the silence. It'll take you to the truth. And now, decades later, the silence had come for him. He knelt on the attic floor, overwhelmed. Why me? He asked. The girls knelt beside him. Because he trusted you, one said. And you're the only one who still can hear him, said the other. Keanu looked up, eyes shining. Is he alive? They didn't answer. They simply pointed toward a faded wooden panel in the attic wall. Without another word, Keanu stood and walked to it. He touched the panel and felt warmth. It opened with a groan, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into the darkness. No one knew about it. Not even Elias. Or maybe he had known. Maybe he had planned it all along. The twins stood at the top of the stairs. This is where it begins again, they said. Keanu nodded, heart racing. I'm ready. He descended the stairs, one hand on the wall, the darkness swallowing him with every step. Each footfall echoed deeper than the one before, as if he wasn't just going underground, he was going back in time, toward the beginning of something or the end. As the door closed behind him and the last light from the attic faded, Keanu Reeves stepped into a new silence. But this time, he wasn't afraid. He was ready to remember. He was ready to find the truth. And far below, where even the air had forgotten how to breathe, a single voice whispered his name, Elias. The chamber of forgotten voices. The stairs seemed endless. They curled downward in a perfect spiral, each step colder than the last, as if the air itself had been trapped for centuries and was only now being disturbed. Keanu Reeves descended slowly, one hand tracing the damp wall, his other clutching the flashlight he had taken from the attic, the same one he and Elias used when they were kids. The beam flickered from time to time, The batteries weak, but it was enough to guide his steps through the suffocating darkness. Every sound, every breath, every movement echoed unnaturally around him, like the silence had grown impatient with being ignored. This place wasn't just hidden. It had been sealed off from the world for a reason. As he walked deeper, flashes of old memories began to surface in his mind, sharp and sudden like broken glass. He saw the two of them racing bicycles through wet streets, Elias laughing so hard he could barely pedal. He remembered them lying on the roof of the mansion, counting stars and talking about galaxies as if they weren't just faraway dots, but destinations they could actually reach someday. And then, inevitably, came the final night. The moment he looked away. The moment Elias vanished. The guilt swelled in his chest again, not as pain, but as pressure. The kind that forces you to act, to keep moving, to search even if you're afraid of what you might find. After what felt like an hour, the stairs ended abruptly. Keanu stepped off the final stone and onto a smooth marble floor. The air was thicker here, almost liquid. Before him stretched a long corridor lined with arched pillars carved from black stone, and at the far end stood a door unlike any he had ever seen. It was circular with no handle or visible hinges and covered in symbols that pulsed faintly as if alive. As he approached, he realized the symbols were familiar, not from dreams or imagination, but from the notebooks Elias used to scribble in during their time together. Symbols he had dismissed as childish drawings. Now they glowed with intent, with purpose, and the closer he got, the louder a low hum began to grow beneath his feet, like the earth itself was preparing to speak. He stopped inches from the door. The air vibrated. The symbols reacted to his presence, flaring brighter, and then, without a single touch, the door opened inward with a whisper of sound, so soft it felt like breath against the skin. Beyond it was a vast chamber carved into the bedrock. The ceiling arched high above him, out of reach of the flashlight's beam, and the walls were covered in markings. Not random, but arranged, like pages in an ancient book written in a language forgotten by time. The center of the room was dominated by a circular platform, and above it floated something impossible. A sphere made entirely of light and shadow, constantly shifting, its form never settling, as if it was made of memory itself. Keanu stepped into the chamber cautiously. The moment his foot touched the stone circle, the air stilled. The hum stopped. The light dimmed. And then, in the space where silence should have remained, came a voice. "You finally came." He turned, quickly, eyes searching, but no one stood behind him. The voice hadn't come from a direction, it had come from everywhere at once. Soft, patient, tired. "Elias?" Keanu asked, his voice cracking under the weight of emotion and disbelief. The sphere above the platform pulsed. From its surface, images began to emerge. First blurry, then sharp. Keanu saw Elias, older, gaunter, eyes filled with knowledge and sorrow. He stood in a room of the same stone, surrounded by the same shadows Keanu had seen in the mirror. He wasn't bound. He wasn't restrained. He was speaking to them. "I tried to fight it," Elias said, his voice echoing from the sphere. "I tried to hold on to the world, to you, to the boy who made me believe there was more than pain waiting in the silence." Keanu stepped closer. "Where are you?" The image shifted. It showed a vast city underground, built into the walls of a colossal cavern, towers of crystal, bridges of light, and creatures, not human, not alien, but something in between. They moved gracefully, silently, their eyes luminous. And at the center of it all stood Elias. "I made a choice," his voice continued. "The night I disappeared, they came to me. Not with violence, not with fear. With truth. They offered a way to understand the silence, to stop running from it. And I said yes." Keanu shook his head slowly, confusion and emotion swirling inside, him like a storm. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say goodbye?" The sphere dimmed, and a different scene appeared, one from decades ago. The attic. Keanu sleeping on a pile of blankets. Elias standing by the window writing something in a notebook with tears in his eyes. Because you were the only thing I couldn't let go of. Elias's voice whispered. And if I had looked into your eyes that night, I would have stayed. And the silence would have taken someone else. Maybe you. Keanu sank to his knees, his breath shaky. The truth was almost too much. All those years, he had blamed himself, carried that weight. When in reality, Elias had made a sacrifice. He had chosen to walk into the unknown so that Keanu wouldn't have to. You shouldn't have done it alone, Keanu said quietly, eyes brimming with tears. I would have gone with you. I know, the voice replied gently. That's why I didn't ask. The chamber shifted again. The walls glowed with symbols that began to move, rearranging into a pattern that slowly revealed a map. Not of the earth, but of a deeper world beneath it. Tunnels, chambers, hidden gateways. At the center of it all was a single glowing point labeled not in words but in emotion. It pulsed with longing, sorrow, and something even deeper. Hope. They are breaking, Elias's voice said. The silence is changing. It's no longer just a watcher. It's waking. And the twins, they're not human anymore. Not completely. They're echoes. Fragments of time created when I made my choice. They can only exist where silence touches memory. Keanu rose slowly. What do I need to do? Find me, the voice answered, but not to save me, to finish what I couldn't. The silence is trying to reshape the world, to erase noise, feeling, choice, and if it succeeds, everything becomes still, forever. Keanu walked toward the edge of the platform, the light from the sphere washing over his face. He wasn't afraid anymore. Everything had led to this. The girls, the library, the memories, the stairs. And now, this message from a friend he had never stopped loving, never stopped searching for. Follow the map, Elias whispered. You only have 3 days. After that, the silence will spread. Why me? Keanu asked again. A long pause. Then softly, because you still remember how to listen. The sphere pulsed once more and then dissolved into the air, vanishing like breath on a mirror. The chamber dimmed and the glowing path on the floor lit up, leading to a door he hadn't noticed before, carved from dark crystal and covered in living light. The moment he touched it, warmth spread through his hand, through his arm, into his chest, and suddenly, he knew where to go. Not with a map, not with logic, with memory. Intuition. Love. As he passed through the crystal door, the chamber sealed behind him, and the corridor ahead narrowed into a tunnel carved from bone-white stone. The walls whispered with distant echoes, memories not his own, voices from lost cities and forgotten promises, and as he walked, the image of Elias's face stayed clear in his mind, not as the boy he lost, but as the man he had become. But Keanu knew this wasn't the end. This was just the second door, and beyond the next was the place where silence wasn't waiting. It was hunting. The city beneath forgetting. The tunnel narrowed as Keanu moved forward, his steps echoing softly against the bone-white stone, each one drawing him deeper into a world where reality no longer obeyed the rules he had known. The air changed gradually, growing warmer, heavier, almost charged with a quiet tension, as if even the walls were holding their breath. The deeper he went, the more distant the surface world became, not just physically, but emotionally. Sounds from above were long gone. Memories felt muffled. The names of streets, faces of people, and titles of movies blurred like ink soaked in rain. Yet despite this strange erosion of detail, the one memory that stayed clear was Elias. Not as he had been on that final night, but as he had appeared in the vision, older, wiser, and burdened with a sadness too vast to be spoken aloud. After what felt like hours, the tunnel widened again, curving open into an immense underground cavern. Keanu stopped at the edge, overwhelmed. Before him stretched a city carved entirely into the stone. It rose and fell like a forgotten cathedral, spires of crystal that shimmered with shifting color, bridges strung with strands of light, towers that pulsed softly as if alive. It was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache, not just for its grandeur but for the silence that hung over it like a shroud. No voices, no footsteps, no birds, no wind. Just the hum of memory and the feeling that time here had stopped waiting, long ago. As he stepped into the city, the first thing he noticed was the writing. Not painted or printed, but woven into the very surfaces. Lines of thought, fragments of memory, stitched into walls, into floors, into the air itself. Some of it he could understand. Others felt like emotions given form. On one archway he saw the phrase, "Those who forget are consumed." On another, echoes become walls when truth is buried. Every corner whispered something. It wasn't madness. It was history, preserved in feeling. Keanu moved through the city like a ghost in a place meant only for the dead. He passed statues carved, of people who looked almost real, not stylized but captured in precise detail, each with closed eyes and expressions of quiet sorrow. He stopped in front of one that looked uncannily familiar. It took him a moment to realize why. The face was his own, but not as he was now, as he had been at 17 just before Elias disappeared. The statue held an old book to its chest and had a single tear carved into its cheek. Beneath it was a plaque, written in a script that seemed to shift between languages until settling on something he understood, the one who almost remembered. His breath caught. This city didn't just know him. It remembered him better than he remembered himself. Suddenly the silence was broken, not by sound, but by presence. He turned and saw them, the twins. They stood across the plaza, barefoot on the stone, their blue ribbons fluttering despite the still air. This time they looked different, older, not in body, but in eyes. Their gazes were heavy with something ancient. They approached slowly, steps in perfect unison, and stopped in front of him without a word. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, finally, one of them whispered, "This is the place where voices go when they are no longer believed." Keanu frowned, trying to grasp the meaning. "What do you mean?" The other twin stepped forward. "When people forget, they don't just lose memory. They abandon the voices inside them, fears, hopes, promises. Those voices come here. They take shape. They wait." "For what?" Keanu asked. "For someone to remember." He looked around. "So this city is made of memories?" The first twin nodded. "Yes, and silence wants to keep them here forever." Keanu felt the weight of that. All his life he had wondered where lost dreams went, where unfinished songs and abandoned friendships disappeared to. Now he knew. They didn't vanish. They settled, like dust, in this impossible city beneath forgetting. And somewhere in this vast maze of memory, Elias was waiting. "Can you take me to him?" Keanu asked quietly. The twins looked at each other. Then the second girl stepped forward and took his hand. "He is already coming to you," she said. "But first you have to face the thing that broke him." They led him through winding alleys, across translucent bridges, past chambers where memory shimmered in the walls like heat. They reached a gate shaped like an open eye, taller than any building Keanu had seen, made of obsidian that seemed to drink the light around it. The eye blinked slowly as they approached, then opened fully. The gate melted away, revealing a chamber beyond that pulsed with an unnatural darkness. Inside, Keanu saw something that didn't belong, a doorway, not made of stone or light or memory but of wood, plain, cracked, and familiar. It was the door to Elias's childhood home, his real home, the place where he was never seen, where he once confessed, "When I speak, no one hears me. When I scream, no one flinches." Keanu stepped through the door. Instantly, the world changed. He was back in the house, not as it had looked decades ago, but as a twisted, decaying version. Furniture lay broken, walls sagged, photographs were torn in half. The silence here was different, and it was cruel, oppressive. Every corner of the house whispered a lie. You didn't try hard enough. You didn't love him enough. You let him go. He stumbled through the living room, memories clawing at him like wind. He saw himself as a teenager standing by the door, begging Elias to leave with him, and he saw Elias hesitating, glancing back at a man in the shadows, his father, whose face was nothing but a blur of rage and indifference. Keanu moved up the stairs. Each step was harder, heavier. He reached the bedroom. The door creaked open. Elias sat on the floor. Not the man from the vision, but the boy, the same age he had been when he disappeared. He stared out the window, his back to Keanu, unmoving. Keanu stepped closer. Elias, the boy turned. But it wasn't Elias. It was silence. A figure shaped like Elias but hollow, its face a smooth mirror reflecting Keanu's own sorrow back at him. The figure rose slowly and walked toward him. With each step, the room darkened. The walls peeled away. The house vanished. They were back in the city, only now it was collapsing. Towers fell in slow motion. Bridges unraveled into threads. Memories shattered like glass. And silence spread through everything, erasing sound, motion, even light. Keanu stood frozen as the figure reached him and pressed a cold, invisible hand to his chest. And then, everything stopped. A single voice broke through. Not him, not yet. It was Elias. The real Elias. Light exploded from above, cutting through the darkness like dawn breaking over a long, cruel night. The silence shrieked, not with sound, but with fury. It recoiled, retreated, folding in on itself until it vanished into the cracks of the city. And standing at the center of the light, arms outstretched, was Elias. He looked older than in the vision. Older than Keanu. His hair streaked with white, his clothes worn like a monk or a wanderer. But his eyes were the same. Gentle, fierce, alive. Keanu ran forward. They met in the center of the crumbling city, and for a long time, said nothing. Then Elias whispered, "You remembered." Keanu nodded, barely able to breathe. "And you waited," he said. Elias smiled, sadness and pride mixed in one expression. "The silence wanted me to forget who I was," he said, "but I held on to one thing." "What?" Keanu asked. Elias stepped forward, placing his hand over Keanu's heart. "You." Around them the city began to stabilize. Light returned, echoes grew into songs, the statues opened their eyes, and the twins stood at the edge of it all, watching silently, their work not done but finally understood. Yet even as the city healed, Elias's smile faded. "This isn't over," he said. "You found me, but now we have to stop the silence from spreading." Keanu looked out across the city, once broken, now alive, and saw something on the horizon. A new door. This one wasn't hidden. It was waiting, and behind it was the beginning of the end. The door of first forgetting Keanu Reeves and Elias stood side by side, their shadows stretching long behind them as the light of the rebuilt city began to flicker. Though beauty had returned to the ruins, it pulsed with an uneasy rhythm, as if even the air knew that peace was only a pause, not a promise. The silence, though pushed back, had not been defeated. It had simply recoiled, as any wounded predator might, crawling back into the deep fractures of the world to gather its strength, to wait for its moment to return. And now that moment was drawing near, and both men could feel it. A hum beneath the stone, a tremor in memory, a stillness, so vast it swallowed even thought. Yet they did not retreat. They stood before the door of first forgetting, the last threshold, carved not by hand or history, but by decision. The ancient decision of someone who had once chosen to unmake what was unbearable to remember. The door itself was unlike anything Keanu had ever seen. It did not shimmer or glow or radiate with any force. Instead, it appeared dull, unfinished. A slab of darkened stone with no markings, no hinges, no lock. It was so plain it almost disappeared into the wall around it, as if its purpose was not to be found but to be denied. Still, he knew, deep in his blood, This was the place. The twins had vanished again, their presence no longer visible but felt, hovering in the corners of time. Elias, silent beside him, took a slow breath and placed his hand upon the door. "This is where it began," he said quietly, his voice brittle with memory. "Not my vanishing, not the silence. This door is older than us, older than the city. This is the place where the first voice chose to forget." Keanu looked at him confused. "Forget what?" Elias's eyes drifted to the floor. "Themselves." He pressed his palm deeper into the stone, and slowly, soundless and heavy, the door opened inward. Beyond it stretched a tunnel, not made of stone or crystal like the rest of the city, but of woven thought. The walls were made of stories, of choices never spoken aloud, of possibilities left behind. And at the very end of that corridor was something neither man could truly see, only feel, a presence vast and ancient, waiting not to attack, but to be acknowledged. The silence was not a monster in the way the world imagined. It was not a demon, not a spirit, not a force of evil. It was sorrow given form, grief so old it had become still. It was born when the first soul in the universe cried out and no one answered. They walked the corridor together, their steps synchronized not by design, but by years of memory and emotion bound tighter than any bond blood could offer. The further they walked, the more the world behind them unraveled. They heard the sounds of laughter fading, voices blurring, details unraveling into abstraction. The city behind them dimmed, and Keanu realized that to reach the silence was to risk forgetting everything that mattered, every face, every name, every moment that made him who he was. But this time, he would not turn away. He would not fail the boy who waited for him. And Elias, walking beside him, no longer walked as someone burdened by the past. He walked with the dignity of someone who had endured the void and returned, whole. They reached the chamber at the end. It was not dark. It was not light. It was not anything that could be described with the words they had carried from the surface. It simply was. A space where sound curled into corners and emotion hung in the air like fog, and at the center was the silence. Not shaped like a person, not even shaped like a shadow. It was a void, a breach in the soul of time itself. Yet within it were fragments, echoes, reflections of all who had encountered it and all who had fed it. People who had abandoned hope, given up on love, turned their backs on memory. It was built from the quiet moments when children stopped crying because no one came, from the pauses in sentences that were never finished, from the weight of love never spoken. And now it turned toward Keanu and Elias not with hostility, but with recognition. Elias stepped forward and spoke, not with his mouth but with the raw force of memory. "You took my voice," he said, his words stretching through the chamber, "because I offered it, because I thought silence would be easier than pain." The void pulsed, and in response a vision appeared. Elias as a boy, standing at the edge of the mansion roof whispering into the wind, "I can't do this anymore." And the silence answering not with violence, but with welcome. "But I was wrong," Elias said. "Silence is not peace. Silence is forgetting. Silence is the death of everything we never dared to say." Keanu stepped forward beside him. He didn't speak at first, but then the words came, not rehearsed, not grand, but true. "I was angry for so long," he said. "Angry at you, angry at myself. I thought I failed you. I thought you left because I wasn't enough. But it wasn't about me, was it? You didn't leave me. You left a world that made you invisible. You chose silence because no one was listening." The chamber shifted again. Images appeared, thousands of them. People across time and place, all caught in moments of silent grief. A girl kneeling beside a closed door, waiting for her mother to return. An old man staring at a photo, unable to remember the face in it. A boy hiding under a bed, his mouth open in a scream no one ever heard. And in the center of all of it, the twins appeared. But this time, they were not children. They were whole. They were the embodiment of the last memory Elias had carried with Him before the silence took him. The memory of the night he and Keanu had stood beneath a sky full of stars and promised never to let go. The twins were that promise, fractured into two forms, guiding Keanu back not just to Elias, but to himself. "You don't have to destroy the silence," the twins said together. "You have to speak into it." Elias turned to Keanu. "Can you do it, even if it doesn't answer?" Keanu closed his eyes. He thought of every moment he had ever chosen silence. Every time he had swallowed pain, withheld kindness, stepped away from someone who needed to be seen. He thought of the quiet that had grown in him since he lost Elias. And then, from the center of his soul, he spoke a single sentence. "I see you." The chamber trembled, not violently, not in anger, in relief. The silence pulsed, once, twice, then cracked open like glass under warmth. From within, it came a sound, not loud, a breath, a sob, and then, slowly, from the void emerged thousands of voices, not screaming, not shouting, but whispering their truths, not lost, not erased, just waiting to be heard. The silence was not defeated. It was healed, because someone finally listened, because someone finally remembered, because someone finally spoke. The chamber dissolved into light, and Keanu felt himself lifted, not with force, but with memory. The stories that had been trapped began to return to their rightful places. The city above reformed, no longer a graveyard of forgotten dreams, but a cathedral of remembered truths. And Elias stood beside him, not fading, not vanishing, but shining. And then he said softly, "I think it's time to go back." Keanu nodded, but even as he turned to leave, he knew something had changed forever. The silence had not been a villain. It had been a wound, and now it was no longer bleeding. The voice that remained, the return from the chamber of silence, was not marked by fanfare or light, not by the chime of 1,000 voices rejoicing or the eruption of color across the darkened sky. It was quiet. A quiet different from the stillness that had haunted them. This was the quiet that followed understanding. The quiet that wrapped itself around a soul when the screaming inside it had finally been heard. Keanu Reeves walked beside Elias through the corridors of memory that had once threatened to consume them. The city that once bent under the weight of forgotten sorrow now stood tall, its towers humming not with pain, but with purpose. Where before there had been statues with closed eyes and mouths frozen in silence, now there were figures walking, speaking in languages made from music and memory, voices layered with the power of healing and the tenderness of reclaimed time. The silence had not been destroyed. It had been invited to change. And it had. Keanu had expected euphoria, a kind of celebratory freedom in the aftermath of what they had done. But what settled inside him was something far richer: peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of wholeness. It was the feeling of knowing he had finally lived up to a promise that had nearly drowned him. He glanced at Elias, and there was no longer any trace of the lost boy who had once stood on the edge of a crumbling rooftop, ready to disappear into the arms of nothing. There was strength in him now, not loud, not proud, but unshakable. They had both been changed by what they had faced, and neither of them would ever be alone again. As they approached the center of the city, the twins appeared once more. They no longer looked like children. They had grown, not physically but energetically. The weight of their task finally lifted. They no longer shimmered with unspoken truths or moved like whispers. Now they were vibrant, grounded, real. They smiled at Keanu and Elias with a softness that only those who had walked alongside sorrow could offer, and for the first time they did not speak in riddles or layered meanings. Instead, they simply said, "It is time." A pathway opened beneath their feet, not of stone or light, but of memory. Real memory. Each step forward lit the way with fragments of lives remembered. Keanu's first audition, Elias's first book of sketches, laughter shared on rainy rooftops, tears wiped away in unspoken understanding. all playing out as if the world itself had chosen to honor their journey. They walked through these moments together, not as prisoners of the past, but as its caretakers, guiding each fragment back into the tapestry of time where it belonged. And then they reached the end of the path, a single door, identical to the one that had first brought Keanu into this hidden world, plain and unfinished. This one, however, was not made for forgetting. It was made for returning. Keanu placed his hand upon the door and felt a warmth unlike anything he had known. It was not heat, but memory, the sensation of every voice he had ever silenced inside himself coming back, not to accuse him, but to thank him. He turned to Elias, unsure what would happen on the other side, whether they would return to their exact lives or if they would even return together. But Elias already knew the question. He smiled faintly and said, "I'm not meant to go where you're going, not in the way you think." Keanu's heart ached. "But we just found each other." Again, Elias reached up and touched his shoulder. "And we always will. You brought me back, Keanu. Not just from the silence, from becoming someone I wasn't meant to be. But the world you're returning to, it still needs you. It still forgets. And you've become the one who remembers." He looked into Keanu's eyes with the same conviction he had shown as a boy when they dreamed of rewriting everything. "But this time, you don't go back to live in shadows. You go back to speak. You go back to remind others that silence isn't safety. It's just waiting." Keanu didn't argue. He knew it was true. Elias's path had always been in the deep places of the world, among the echoes and the broken stories. But his was in the light, where silence crept in through polite conversation, through people walking past each other with buried pain. He was going back, not to act, not to vanish into characters, but to be himself, to use the voice he had found in the depths. The door opened, and Keanu stepped through. When his eyes opened again, he was lying on a bench beneath a tree. The sky was overcast. A light breeze moved through the branches, sending small leaves drifting down across his coat. He sat up slowly. The world was normal. Cars passed. People walked. No one noticed him. No one paused. But something was different. Not around him, but within him. He stood and walked. The city felt new, like someone had wiped away a fog that had been hanging there for years. The colors were richer, the sounds clearer. He passed people and for the first time really saw them. A woman wiping tears on a subway platform, a boy clutching a worn-out book like it was the last thing that made sense in his life. A man staring blankly out a cafe window with eyes that held 100 untold stories. Keanu paused, looked at them, and nodded. Just a small gesture, but it mattered because someone had noticed. He didn't return to the mansion. It was no longer there. In its place was a small garden, overgrown and wild, but beautiful. At its center stood a tree. Beneath it, a stone bench. Carved into its surface were simple words for those who choose to remember. Keanu sat there for a long time watching people pass, and then slowly, others began to sit with him. Not because they knew him, but because something about his presence made it easier to breathe, easier to speak, easier to be. Weeks passed, then months, and Keanu kept showing up, sitting, listening, remembering. Strangers would sit beside him and share stories they hadn't told in years, of mothers who vanished without explanation, of dreams left behind in childhood, of words they never got to say. And Keanu never offered advice. He didn't preach, he didn't fix, he listened, he held their stories. And in doing so, he became what the world had almost forgotten it needed, a voice that remained. One day a child walked up to him, a girl, with a blue ribbon in her hair. She smiled and whispered, "He's proud of you." Keanu smiled back. "No," he said, and as she ran off, her laughter echoing across the garden, Keanu leaned back and looked up at the sky, feeling the weight of everything he had been through, the sorrow, The silence, the struggle, not as a burden, but as a foundation. He had gone into the silence and returned with a truth stronger than forgetting, a truth that would live in every story he heard, in every person he saw, in every whisper he answered. Because sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is the voice that chooses to stay.